Good evening, everybody. I want to call the City Council special work session for Thursday, September 22nd, 2022 to order. And do I hear a motion for adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? The ayes have it. It passes unanimously for adoption of the agenda. Thank you. And tonight for council discussion topics, we have the mayor's proposed revenue projection overview. And we have a very short period of time. Welcome, Director Vaughn and everyone else. And I hope you all had a chance to take a look at the email I quickly sent out this morning regarding expectations and sort of setting the stage. So with that, I will hand it over to Director Vaughn, please.
And thank you, Deputy Mayor. And that was just the right amount of time to get my presentation up. So we're going to briefly go over the revenue projections for that is within the mayor's proposed budget. So walking to the first slide, I'm just going to do a quick overview since this meeting is only about 45 minutes. We're going to walk through the city's funds individually, only on the revenue side. Next, we're going to review what revenue increases are currently being proposed. 3, we are going to revisit the additional revenue options. That slide at this point should look very familiar. And walking down to, if there's time, we will begin the council question and answer process. And then I do want to take a minute to note that on the city's budget calendar, it did state on this meeting that there would be public comment, of which I've highlighted down right below. And I just want to take a minute to say that within work sessions, typically that are before council meetings, there is not public comment. So if there is public comment about anything to do with the mayor's proposed budget, it would be asked that the public addresses that during the regular city council meeting during that public comment session. And then I did just want to highlight that next Monday, September 26th, will be the start of the city council deliberations. And if you want to go look at the full budget calendar, that again is highlighted on page 25 of the mayor's proposed budget. So going to the next slide, I just did screenshots to make this easy, but this is also, these are exact screenshots from your mayor's proposed budget. At the top, to make this very user-friendly, I tried to definitely include the page number of which each screenshot is coming out of, so that you can track in your book if you would like to write questions down to be addressed either possibly tonight or again, if we do run out of time, then on Monday. So walking down to the first item, this is just kind of an overview. What I'm going to discuss is what is built into these numbers. So when we say that the property tax is the big one for the city, what is currently built into that number is increasing what we define as the 1% for the levy lift that is adopted on an annual basis. So that is built in for fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24 with property taxes. Even though the city adopts a biennial budget, we still have to revisit and adopt that portion annually. So I just wanted to take a minute to say that. The sales and use tax, that is done on a trend. And also what's highlighted that I didn't take a minute to, that I will now, the method, the method, I got a little ahead of myself. The method is stated within the budget, like trend, T is for a trend, A is for actual, E is for like an economist. So it tries to help identify what is being used on how the city, the administration ends up projecting the number that they are projecting. So that's just another little helpful tool that's also outlined in the budget. So those are the two that I want to highlight out of all of the taxes. It goes down to business tax, and that's just a slight increase. And then going from there, I'm going to walk down to the next slide, which is the licenses and permits section of the general fund. And within this portion, I will state that there's the construction permits, plumbing, mechanical, and these are ones that we watch pretty closely on our budget monitoring. And when we have revenues such as these, this is where I lean very heavily on what I would define as the subject matter expert, being our building official, and go directly to him to work together to look at the history, but he is going to be the one with the intimate knowledge in order to make sure that we are projecting what we would define as an accurate estimate moving forward. So that being said, the construction permits, plumbing permits, and mechanical permits, I teamed up with our building official, Calvin, who actually you will be hearing from later this evening, on all of those numbers. On the land use permits, that is actually a planning item. And so again, back to teaming up with the subject matter expert, then Director Bennett and I worked together to come up with that number to make sure that it was accurate for the city moving forward. So that being said, this is truly a team effort. This isn't just a finance operation exercise. This is truly a citywide exercise. And those are the ones I wanted to kind of highlight out of that item. Moving down to the intergovernmental revenues is how we define them. A lot within here, you will see the less than lethal Department of Commerce. You will see the 5092 appropriation. That was a one, all of these are like one time, the King County Waterworks grant. These are one-time grant revenues that are coming in that we are not anticipating in the future 23-24 budget. And actually that was a state shared revenue that SB 5092 was for the police department. So then walking down to a couple of the others, the multimodal transportation, criminal justice population, the special programs, the liquor excise tax, the liquor board profits, all of those are considered like state shared revenues, where MRSC puts out like a calculator that and it's pretty accurate from past history. They are pretty on point. And so we take those numbers, we use them. We estimate until they come out with their calculator, and then we use them directly. And then slowly for the 2024, we increase it just slightly to come up with the second year. But those are pretty accurate numbers, and that's where they come from. The hazardous waste grant and King County recycling grant, those tend to be pass-through grants. So we have a recycling event, King County will reimburse us directly for the exact amount. So they end up being a pass-through on cost. And then actually I did skim over the EMPG grant. That is actually also, that's a NEMCO, that's an emergency management grant that the city receives that we actually share with Kenmore. So the city gets about $20,000, $21,000 a year, and then we split that with Kenmore, and it's to support our emergency management operations. So walking down to the charges for goods and services, mainly within here, the way that the city has a cost allocation. So you're going to see interfund services from the surface water the surface water, the sewer utility, the streets, the transportation capital, capital improvement, and the replacement fund. Any fund that has an operating aspect to it, our cost allocation policy then has an equation that comes up with these amounts that we then, and they're estimated. And then if for budgeting purposes, they are estimated. And then they are actually based on actuals at the end of a fiscal year. So those are actually done on actuals at the end of a year. And also wanted to highlight on this one, this is where we show our passport revenue. Wanted to highlight that. And again, back to making sure that we partner with the subject matter expert. And this is where we, our municipal services department leads the passport function for the city. And so that's where I partnered with our city clerk, which I'm very grateful for his assistance to make sure that we have a number that we all feel very comfortable with for the next 2 years that we are able to meet. Walking down to the miscellaneous revenue, still in the general fund, and I do promise that the general fund is the largest fund that we will go over this evening. But this is the final conversation on the general fund. So miscellaneous revenue, this is kind of the miscellaneous revenue portion that ends up being a little bit of the catch-all. So walking down, I would say that the tree, what's come up previously is the city forestry account is what we would define as the tree account, just to highlight that. And so, or the tree fund, it's been named quite a few things. This is the revenue that will show from that. And actually, on a previous slide, I mentioned the King County Waterworks grant, and that is actually associated with the tree fund. Those were one-time funds. So those go hand in hand together, just highlighting that. And I also want to highlight that there is a refundable sound transit deposit, and that's been put in for the 21-22 projected. I want to highlight that that is labeled as a refundable deposit. So the city would not technically define that as revenue. So I want to specifically highlight that out, that it is a true refundable deposit and dollar amount that is in the funds. And then you will see that, and I think actually that probably concludes that overview. Walking into some of the next, the other funds that the city has, the street fund, right-of-way permits, construction, again, this is, there are other subject matter experts that have assisted in assisting in providing these numbers to help make sure that we are reflecting an accurate estimation for what we believe for the future for 23 and 24. And then gas taxes, that's actually another one that I stated previously is part of the state shared revenues. Those numbers are estimated and projected, and then we use those numbers for the 1 year, and then slightly we'll give them a minor increase to help us estimate for the next year, because they are quite accurate. And then going down to the city council contingency fund, that is typically a fund that just sits and accrues interest as like an emergency fund. The transportation benefit district fund, this is where the vehicle license tab fees go into this individual fund. And so that's the only revenue that's receipted into that fund besides interest. And then walking down to the budget stabilization fund, that also is just a fund that has a balance that accrues a small amount of interest. going down to the Strategic Opportunity Fund, this is the fund that was originally created where the city elected to pay for purchasing the lakefront property that received all of those grants. So you'll see a lot of activity in 21 or 22, but that's a one-time purchase. And we will not see that level of activity moving forward. That was just a one-time deal. And I did actually break out because we do have two line items of the King County CFT funds, the Conservation Futures Grants, but one was for the lakefront property and the next one is for, it's a parks grant. And so I didn't want to put those on one line item in order to alleviate any confusion that might have moving forward. But those are CFT grant, that's grant funding moving forward. And then we just heard that we are in the process of getting the final reimbursement grant. And so at the end of 2022, we definitely will have the sewer capital fund, the interfund loan paid back to that fund, which is the 1.3. And so that will be completely closed out and finalized. Moving down to the ARPA fund, that, as you likely remember, came in two tranches, and 21 and 22. And so that was two tranches. This is the revenue that the city will receive. It's a one-time deal, one-time ARPA funds. And so there will be no more, there will not be an additional revenue source on that fund. Walking down to the capital improvement fund, this is what we've defined mainly. The main revenue source is REIT 1 or real estate excise tax 1. And then in the transportation capital, you'll see real estate excise tax 2. So I'm going to talk about these kind of together because they are the exact same dollar amount, as you will see. So you have the real estate excise tax 1 and 2, and we do believe, as you can see from the previous number, that we have budgeted a very conservative amount because it is a one-time, they are one-time funds, and those are associated with home sales within the city limits. And we just want to be very careful on always budgeting that very conservatively. So within the capital improvement fund, then you have the King County Parks levy that was approved by voters. That is held within that fund for parks improvements. And then interest, and walking down to the transportation capital fund, RAB stands for roundabout. So WASDOT grant RAB is roundabout. So that's probably something that I should note there that is of note. Department of Commerce, that actually is the SR 522 crossing. There's a grant from Department of Commerce. It is tied to that then will have an expenditure tied to that. So it'll be a pass through. And then I also want to highlight that there will be a transfer from the Transportation Benefit District, TBD, which is Fund 104, which we just previously talked about, from the vehicle license fees, but where the city actually pays for its overlays is actually within the Transportation Capital Fund, not the Transportation Benefit District Fund. So we transfer money directly over in order to pay the overlay fees or the overlay cost to have done for the city. Walking down to the Capital Facilities Maintenance Fund, this is kind of a newer created fund that is funded by other funds, mainly the Capital Improvement Fund. And so funds will come into that fund in order to, and this is where we actually, as you look around, you can thank the wonderful paint on the walls, the carpet, new carpet on the floor. This is where we pay for things along those lines. The HVAC that we've been talking about, that's where we would pay for those funds, but it is funded from the Capital Improvement Fund. The sewer utility fund going down, this is a rate bearing fund, so it's paid for by rates. This is where I want to take a minute to say that part of what's built into these numbers is King County is raising their rates at 5.75 for fiscal year 2023 and 2024. So we are going to need to increase the rates as a pass through to cover those costs. The city then is also proposing to raise the smaller amount of the actual sewer cost rate, being the city's portion 3% every single or both years for 2023 and 24. Historically, the city, because historically King County, I should start with, has raised their rates every other year, but recently they changed their model to increasing their rate every single year. Therefore, and the city would then leapfrog on the year that they did not raise their rate and raise the city's rate. And so the city would raise the rate at 6% every other year. So now that that is not occurring, then the city has elected to just raise the rate at 3% every single year to follow just the increase in operations. And also highlighting that the sewer capital fund, walking down to that fund, is funded from the rate that is collected for the utility. Going down to the surface water utility fund. This is probably the proposal that's included within the mayor's proposed budget is a rate increase on the surface water utility fund to not only assist in helping the city cover costs for the utility fund, but also for the capital fund. So the rate increase that I'm going to discuss here in just a minute is not just to pay for the utility operations, which have continued to increase for permits, and which is why you've seen our senior project manager in front of you quite often lately, discussing all the stormwater requirements, asking for approval on contracts in order to stay in compliance with all of the permits and the fees and what we need to do as a city in order to stay in compliance. And so the rate being proposed in 2023 is a 10% increase. And again, in 2024 is an additional 10% increase. And so then walking down to the surface water capital, I want to highlight the WSDOT grant and the Department of Commerce grant. Both of those grants were secured in order to assist in the Culvert L90 design and right-of-way acquisition. And I believe that concludes, oh, and then as you'll see, again, as I was stating, the transfer from surface water 403 is, as I previously stated, the surface water utility fund also assists in the capital fund. So walking down to the sewer bond reserve fund, this is a fund that I'm just going to take a minute to explain that if the city, or because the city, I should say, not if, because the city is paying debt on their sewer infrastructure, this fund is a requirement to have this. So it has a fund balance as of right now, and it will just continue to accrue some interest, but it's a requirement in order to hold debt that if the city, it's just a standard, I should leave it at that. It's just a standard item that if you have debt on a sewer or revenue, that you have to hold a bucket of money called a reserve, a sewer bond reserve, in order to ensure payment. Moving down to the Public Works Trust Fund repayment, this is where we actually pay for some of our what we would define as our debt payment. And the excise tax revenue, I just want to highlight that there are a few customers, sewer customers within the city limits that are on septics that have liens in order to, once they change hands, they have to connect. And those handful that's where they're paying in their revenue. The city's portion goes into this fund to assist in paying our debt. Walking down to the final screenshot and overview is the Vehicle and Equipment Repair Replacement Fund. So actually this year is the first year that we are proposing, and I'm going to kind of talk about these two together, that the city's proposing to break out. And that's why you'll see absolutely nothing in the fund below it, the Information Technology Equipment Fund. We're proposing to create a new fund for IT replacement, because as things change, we're just moving more towards, and it does, if you just simply think about it, to have IT a replacement schedule within a fund that is also assisting vehicles and equipment repairs, it does seem like they are very different items, even though the reason that it likely that it was put there is because they kind of follow the same model of how you would pay for them, and that you would put revenue in every single year and then have a replacement cycle and a life cycle on the items, hardware, software, so that you could, when it was time to replace them, you had the funds in the fund balance in order to pay for the expenditure. So, but staying on the revenue side, the same concept stands for both funds: the general, the street, the surface water, the sewer utility, the transportation capital. Those are the operating funds that then are going to, there's a cost allocation equation that works into these, that is how the numbers are populated. And as you will see, that the information technology fund doesn't have a beginning fund balance yet, but the city is going to propose possibly taking some of the fund balance from the Vehicle and Equipment Repair Fund, which is where the IT items have been paid for, collected and paid for in the past, and take a small amount of that money, that fund balance, in order to propose starting this new fund to carry it forward. And then moving forward, you will again see a projected fund balance being, or a projected ending fund balance and a fund balance moving forward. But at this time, this is again, a very new proposal in creating the IT Equipment Replacement Fund that is 502, an additional internal service fund that is funded by other funds. And I believe that actually concludes my overview, walking now into the additional revenue options. This is a direct screenshot that has been dropped in that should look very familiar. This slide has actually been discussed quite a bit.
I'm sorry, on which page?
Oh, that is an excellent point. This is not a screenshot that was taken directly from the budget. This is a screenshot that was discussed from the city, from the council retreat.
Yes.
That was then brought up again when we did the brief overview. When we did the brief overview for the proposed budget on September 8th.
Do we have copies of this, hard copy?
We do not right now, no.
We absolutely can, we will post this presentation. The presentation will be, I'll make sure it's emailed out to everybody and posted. That's how I should have phrased it, because that's how it will happen. It will be emailed and
Thank you.
posted. And so walking through this slide is the TBD is the Transportation Benefit District Vehicle License Fee. The proposal there is to increase by the additional $10. And then there's also an item out there that is the Transportation Benefit District that you can increase, that is not required to have a vote. That's a councilmanic item that you can increase. The dollar amounts that are tied to those additional revenue options, walking down to the sewer utility tax and the surface water utility tax, how those numbers are calculated is you just take the one line item of the rate, that one line item, and on a monthly basis, 6%, and then it goes, that's how it's calculated. And then walking down to the technology fee, currently the proposed increase is possibly to increase it at 5%. Currently, right now, the technology fee stands at 5%, and that would be something that would be changed on our current user rate fee schedule that would then be proposed and be adopted through council if that was elected. And then walking down to an item that would be voter approved would be what the city has discussed was the CPI property tax increase. And that item would be what was previously discussed at the city council retreat, was following the same model that the city of Shoreline has elected to propose, which is have the option to increase the property tax in order to assist in operations for the city. And that actually concludes my presentation. Do you want me to this is my Q&A slide. I just wanted to show it. I'll go back. Maybe? Okay, I will go back.
Thank you very much, Director Vaughn. Yeah, we have a few minutes to take questions, and it would be very instructive for us to get the slideshow as well as probably a printed copy of this at some point very soon. Would be great. And I just for clarification, voter approved, again, we're talking about these various options here, the voter approved situation there. This is not something that is necessarily being proposed. It's something that is available.
It's yeah, I definitely want to circle back to these are additional revenue options.
Right.
That can be discussed, explored. That's all that's being proposed at this time, is just that they're on the table for discussion.
Right.
I think is probably the best way to phrase that.
Thank you. Let's see. So first of all, I just wanted to start with a question, and we'll just kind of set the stage here. So in terms of projections of revenues, can you just describe really in basic terms how you have come up with these numbers? Just in the aggregate, what's your thinking?
So in the aggregate, I will say that I am very happy and pleased to say that both City Administrator Hill and I have spent quite a bit of time on the revenue side of these numbers. And that was definitely courtesy of COVID and the pandemic. And I will tell you that we are very, during that time frame, we dug deep into all of them. And so we're very confident, and we're building from what occurred previously through those numbers in order to walk us forward into what's being proposed into the 23-24 revenue line items. We do feel that they are as a whole very accurate. If not a little bit on the conservative side, because there are some numbers that can fluctuate, and we would much rather have them be a little bit on the conservative side, being, for example, the real estate excise tax. That's one that it's just always plays in your favor to err on the side of caution. And if we do end up receiving more money, it's a very easy conversation to come back and ask for the additional revenue increase to add on additional expenditures at that time when the funds have actually been received or on target to definitely exceed the projected revenue numbers.
Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, questions? Looking down the line here, we have two colleagues that are not with us tonight, unfortunately. Yes, please, Councilmember Riddle.
I've noticed that in multiple funds, there was a large increase in investment revenue. Could you explain your thinking behind that for me, please?
Yes, I am very hopeful that I will get to change implement, I should say, actually. We have changed the city's investment policy to include investments. And I'm very hopeful that in the very near future, I don't want to put a date on it and overpromise and not be able to come through on that. However, I am very hopeful that the city will be changing the investment model that we have discussed and that has been approved through the adoption of our financial comprehensive, which is tied within the mayor's proposed budget. And so the goal is to implement a different model that will be discussed and cannot move forward without the Budget and Finance Committee's approval on the strategy. It goes back to the strategy of laddering, and I'm really hopeful that those numbers that are even being proposed on all of the interest items, actually, I will be coming back to you to increase them because it will be worth the ask and to show that it can assist. So I am hopeful that with the implementation of moving towards governmental bonds and investing some of our money and laddering it in an appropriate way and not going out and following the policy, that it will allow the city to receive more on the interest side, which will assist, is probably one of the only things that finance can change, that will assist every single fund that we touch in a positive manner. So basically, long story short, the goal is to try to make our money work for us, to make a little bit of money in a very safe manner.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Councilmember Riddle. Colleagues, Mr. Lebo.
Thank you, Director Vaughn, for the presentation. On this particular slide here, when we talk about additional revenue options, I want to understand how and when we go about doing the rate increases. So you had mentioned, for example, on the sewer, that there are King County increases, which are a pass-through, but there's also a proposal to have an additional 3% each year. How and when is that approved, and how does that relate to, for example, these additional fund requests here? Because there's also a proposal to raise the building permit fees and the mechanical electrical. So how do those discussions and revenues projected from those increases as proposed come into this discussion?
That's a great question. So a couple things, and I might circle back to make sure you added quite a few questions in there, just to make sure I answered them all. I'll just take, for example, the sewer. Start with the sewer. King County is raising their rates, and so the city has options actually, and we've done it both ways, where we have elected to increase the rate, but it doesn't become effective until January 1st of 2023. Actually, at the last biennium, I believe we adopted, because it was built into the budget, we adopted the 2023 increase. Or excuse me, at that time, it would not have been 2023. It would have been the previous 2021 and 2022 increases for sewer at the time of the adoption of the budget. That being stated, the 2022 had language in there that the effective date was January 1 of 2022. So when we adopted I believe at that time it was a resolution to increase that rate. But it wouldn't be effective until January 1 of that next fiscal year. That being stated, so when we had to come back and adopt the user fee schedule, that's also where it would show again. And we would adopt that those rates would then be effective on January 1 of that next fiscal year. The city also has an option to know what's built into this budget And that's part of why I stated the property tax, that it's built in to add the property tax levy increase being the 1% that it's allowed to increase. But every single year, the city has to come back and readopt that. We do not have an option to do that as a 2023 and 2024. Now, the surface water falls directly into that same category where we have to do that. Even if we adopt the intention within a budget, we still have to come back and review and adopt that revenue each fiscal year for those two items. But on the sewer rate, the city has a couple of options on how we would go about adopting the rates for 23 and 24 that we have used in the past, I guess you would say.
So if we want to come back for a moment to, if you go back a slide to the, let's say the sewer utility fund.
The sewer?
Yeah, the sewer utility fund.
Mhm.
Sewer.
Oh, one more. The other sewer.
35.
Yeah, the other
Page
sewer.
35.
The other sewer.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
got my other left hand. So you had mentioned that King County has proposed or adopted a 5% plus increase per year for years 23, 24.
That is correct.
So the difference between the 6.5 and the 7.3 is about 12.2, 12.3%. So does that reflect already the King County sewer increase?
Correct.
Does it also include the proposed 3% Lake Forest Park?
Yes, it includes both.
So, but I guess my question now is that we're using revenue figures that are based upon things for which it's not clear which of these the council has to take action on in order to receive. So on that particular increase, we're assuming that the council is going to increase the sewer fees by the combined total for each year of roughly about 8%. 5
So-
plus 3.
This is just the line item of which they would be receipted in. If we will be going into more detail on each individual rate, and we can bring that back at a council.
So what I'm trying to understand is that there are things that we know, I mean, for example, or that you trend, for example, this sales tax. That's not something that we can control directly. It's based upon what people buy, right?
Correct.
But the revenue that you're projecting here is not based upon what we would otherwise receive just if we didn't do anything. It's in fact based upon an assumption that we are going to do something.
That is correct.
And so what I'm struggling with is to understand of these revenue numbers, how much of this revenue is based upon us doing something to affirm that you actually get that revenue. So it's not clear to me as we look at these revenue numbers, how dependent upon those revenues are actions by the council.
And through this aggregated number, the city does have spreadsheets where we show what it would be to increase the King County's rate individually for theirs versus our city increase. And there are two different portions of the rate that populate the total rate that then is paid for by the customers. And so, but you're saying on the other side, I believe I understand what you're saying. Let me rephrase that. What you're saying is the aggregate of those numbers, when you total them to ask for the 3%, what is the value of the increase of that 3% versus the aggregate? No,
No, it's about the $6.5 million. You're going to receive over the next biennium about $6.5 million if we do nothing because of the existing rate structure.
Mhm.
But in order to get from 6.5 million to 7.3 million, the council will have to take some sort of action to generate that $800,000.
That is correct.
And so it would be helpful for me to understand that there's really two columns for the revenue for the 2023. It's the we do nothing. And then there is the proportion that does in fact require council action to generate a total. Because on many of these numbers, we don't do anything other than the money comes in, right? So on the property tax, for example, it does not require a city action in order to generate the money that comes in otherwise.
That actually, so the property tax, that kind of goes, actually is, there's two pieces to that. There's the portion that would not require city council action, but in order to increase the additional 1%, that increase that has that small amount of increase, that does require council action to approve that property tax levy.
Right. So if you had another column that said, this is the revenue generated because you don't do anything, but this is the revenue that would be generated as an increase because the council took action to increase the taxes associated with that. Because right now, these revenue projections are based upon city council action for which we don't know yet what we're actually being asked to do. So if you had a column to generate the $800,000 in additional revenue for this particular line item, is because the council takes action as a result of the the increases from King County and the choice of the council to increase our own taxes by an additional 3%. So you can't tell from the revenue how much we're proposing to increase taxes or how much is actually dependent upon city council action.
Now I understand what you're saying. Thank you for the clarification. And you are correct that from the aggregate total, presented before you, it's just going to be an aggregate number.
Yeah, because what's missing is the delta, because it does require council action. So if we don't take action, then we don't generate this amount of revenue. But if we take other action, so your proposal on the sewer is to increase it by 3% per year. But you've also indicated on potential additional revenue to increase it by an additional 6%. So the concept then is it's not a 6% additional, it's a 9% additional.
Not totally, because the bulk of the rate, and actually we probably should table this and I will bring it back for the King County, because I don't know the percentage, but the bulk of the actual sewer rate does come from King County. So to say that King County's rate at 5.75, and then there's a portion of the rate. So that portion of the rate, not the rate in aggregate, is being proposed, only their portion, in order to cover the direct cost at this portion. And then the cities, that is a much smaller portion of the aggregate rate, is only being proposed to do 3%. So it's not a true combination together.
Right. Because
however, I do agree. I understand what you're saying. And we can probably work on something to bring that back. But the one thing that I would caution specifically on this is the city doesn't really have a choice on the King County sewer. So I get what you're saying. So, but I want to caution that sometimes if we don't make a rate or a revenue increase to follow a pass through, then it has a bigger expenditure. So we have to make sure that we're talking, even though right here for this presentation, we're only talking for the most part revenue. I just want to take the 1 minute to say there's still an expenditure piece over here that we somehow have to have money coming in to pay for. So that would be my only, so there's multiple pieces that
I
I'm
would suggest that, per your earlier comment, and I apologize for interrupting, but we're going to run out of time here. I would suggest that we table this and move forward with it, but we can certainly have a conversation, continue this on Monday. and subsequent meetings as well if necessary. But I think that there's, it's a very important discussion. And I think there's also a discussion we need to have about the actions that the council actually takes in the budgetary process. So it's not just a matter of saying we are taking action on increasing rates. We have to set the rates on a regular basis. So it's not just, there's always an action regardless of whether we take an increase or not. So I think that since we only have about 10 minutes before we need to get started with the next meeting and we have to get set up with some of our guests here, I apologize, but that was the vagaries of having this during a work session. Is that acceptable to you, Mr. Lebo?
Yes, I'm fine.
Thank you very much. So Director Vaughn, is Monday a good time frame, or should we think about later in the week next? The next time?
I understand the ask. I don't know if the work can fully be completed by Monday, but I think that we can, I understand the request.
It does not need to be done by Monday.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. And maybe what we need to do is on Monday, I didn't want to cut off making sure that we're all on the same page here for clarification. Let's table that part of it to Monday, get the clarification kind of sorted out. And then we can solidify our ask of the administration and make sure that you guys have the pieces that you need to work with. Does that seem reasonable?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, everybody. If there's a quick question for Director Vaughn before we go, just for Monday, I certainly would entertain it if it's anything that's very involved. If not, I would suggest, as I indicated, just 1 second, indicated in my email, you can always email Director Vaughn tomorrow as well. If there's something quick tonight for the edification of the group, please, Mr. Furtani, that'd be great.
Okay, and thank you, Director Vaughn, for a great presentation, and your exchange with Councilmember Lebo has been very instructive as well. I thought I had it and I lost it. I think I may have gotten a little bit of it. My quick question, hopefully it's a quick question, is similar. In the additional revenue slide, you had the technology fee increasing by 5%, and I'm still trying to make one-to-one connections between that increase with things that appear in the actual revenue forecast, and it would help me to see where that ends up.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks.
Can I address
Hill,
that?
please.
Because I think there's some confusion. So in that slide of those additional revenues, those are merely options. None of those are built
Baked in.
into the proposed budget. So nothing on that slide is embedded in the mayor's proposed budget. Those are options that the council could take in looking at the deficit in the general fund of revenues to expenditures. Those are things you could do to start moving the city forward in that revenue picture, but they're not included in this budget.
Thank you for that. Okay, Mr. Goldman.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Councilmember Riddle took my question, but I just want to say I'm also very excited about the laddering. Earlier this week, I checked and CDs and treasuries are over 4%. So if we can get in on some of that action, that'll be great.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much, Director Vaughn. And again, council, this is on Monday is when we're beginning our deliberations and discussion about this. And there's certainly a lot of information that we're going to need to request of the administration. And we thank everybody in the administration for all the hard work they put into the budget. So with that, we will adjourn the special work session. Thank you very much, Director Vaughn, and take a bit of a break here.